as the Horus hawk because he, as the, let me see if I can get this, he, as the messenger of the gods, has traversed the immensities of the sky. He goes clear up out of sight. He's gone far above the flight of all the other gods. He is basically the supreme God. He says on page 83, he says, these texts that are discussing Horus, he shows that the extent of Horus's flight into the sky is so great that it is beyond anything that was formerly attained by any of the other Egyptian gods. Both groups define the inability of the gods to equal the preeminence of Horus. And he says that the... let me see if I can get this. He concludes that the texts discussing the preeminence of Horus, the power of Horus, the glory of Horus, his ability to move through the heavens, is because he is a Horus hawk. It's the Horus hawk that the kings of Egypt identified themselves with as well. This was the idea behind the tail on our figure 7 in facsimile number 2. Min, the deity, also identified with Horus. Because to the Egyptians, I've got some Egyptological studies I'll share with you. To the Egyptians, the worst thing that could happen is to lay inert. They couldn't stand the idea. No, they wanted to move. They wanted freedom. They wanted the ability to go from heaven to earth and back again. They knew they were going to go in the underworld. They had to get out of the underworld. That involved a resurrection. A resurrection involved flight. So the most logical form for the dead to take was to unite with the god Horus, of course, and gain his protection. That came through the Wedjat eye. So we're beginning to get an idea here of what this figure means. Flight, movement, power in the priesthood, the ability to move through the cosmos. These are the grand keywords of the Holy Priesthood. That's what Joseph Smith claimed. That's what he said. That's what he identified the figure as meaning. You know, there's a very important Egyptological source, T.G. Allen's PhD dissertation, Horus in the Pyramid Texts. He goes on and on and on, showing the various offices, the various functions of Horus, as Horus relates to various deities, various of the other gods, as Horus relates to the king, and how the king unites with Horus. Because of Horus's powers of flight, the king is able to ascend to heaven and come back. The king, as well as Horus, is a messenger. Get that fly off that lens. The king, as well as Horus, is a messenger of the gods because the king takes on the characteristics of Horus. So he becomes the deity Horus, and the king thus becomes the god's representative here on earth. And it is through the power of the Wedjat eye that the king can rule. That's basically his scepter of authority, so to speak. Although they do have other scepters, scepters, and the flail and the crook and the hook of Osiris, the king also utilized. But T.G. Allen's PhD dissertation goes on extensively into the very many attributes of Horus and where he's mentioned and how he's mentioned. It's a fascinating study. It's a very important source that I think critics ought to start looking into in order to understand the importance, the implication, the meaning of Horus with the king, as well as with our figure 7 in facsimile number 2. There's another good Egyptological study by Hans Godicke in the Zeitschrift für Ägyptische Sprache. This is for 1993, where Godicke is discussing its thoughts upon the papyrus Westcar, is the name of his title, of his article. He's showing that not only Horus, but there were other deities as well that could serve as messengers of the god. And his idea on Thoth here is interesting. Thoth is the ibis-headed, he's the scribe of the gods. He's the Enoch figure, so to speak. On page 27, Godicke says, Thoth's mention is not connected to a specific cult, but it's rather due to his cosmological role as the manifestation of spirituality. That's interesting. On page 28, he says that Thoth is not a local god, but rather it is in his role as cosmic messenger commuting between the tiers of the Egyptian universe that is emphasized and that is so important. And what this does is it conveys the intentions of the divine, of course, to humanity, us. We need the heavenly information. This is why there are messengers. What better form of a messenger to pick than as the Horus hawk? That's the whole point of the Egyptian iconography. Now, Alan Gardner, in his article, Hymns to Ammon from a Leiden Papyrus, this is in the Zeitschrift für Ägyptische Sprache for 1908, he notes on page 26 that he says, "The Nile floweth from the cavern for thy primordial gods." He says, "Thy name is strong, thy might is heavy, the marvelous mountains cannot withstand thy might. Divine hawk with outspread wings, swooping down and capturing his assailant in the completion of an instant. Mysterious lion, great of roarings, he grips firm those who come beneath his claws. A bull on behalf of his town, a lion on behalf of his people, with his tail lashing against him who encroaches upon him." The might of Ammon is described in a conventional way with the usual comparisons of the god with a hawk, a bull, a lion. You see the various systems of symbolism, strong animals, swift animals, fierce animals. The idea is protection, and the hawk is part of this. It's in our facsimile. It has to do with the grand key words of the priesthood and the father in the form of a dove. It's not necessarily worrisome that the father's in the form of a dove. The idea of the deity in the form of a bird. It doesn't matter what the form of a bird is. The bird is the messenger of the gods. And I've got a great Egyptological study I'm going to show you on that.
Look who I see. There's Horus the hawk. That's Horus the hawk right there. There he is in the sky. That's beautiful. That's Horus the hawk. Every hawk was considered Horus because they traverse the sky. Very important Egyptian animal. I don't know if you can see them or not, but there's the Grand Tetons right through there. They're snow-capped, so they're kind of hard to see, but man, those are beautiful mountains.
So what about this idea of the father in the form of a dove? Is that a contradiction with the Horus hawk? I mean, shouldn't it say the father is a hawk? Not at all. It doesn't matter what kind of bird. The point is, it's a bird. I've got the source for you. I've got several Egyptological sources for you. The fun thing about these Egyptological sources is these are several of the sources that Hugh Nibley used in his books, The Message of the Joseph Smith Papyri, Abraham in Egypt, so on and so forth. And critics have kind of developed a strategy that they say Nibley misuses his sources and therefore he's not to be relied upon, and they simply dismiss his work. They don't even read it, let alone refute it. So, instead of relying on Hugh Nibley, even though he is reliable, I'm here to testify that. Absolutely. I have hundreds of his sources. I'm going to utilize many, many, many of his sources for this idea of the bird as a messenger in the ancient Egyptian thought. And this ties in with facsimile number 1. The angel of the Lord in the form of the bird, the human-headed bobird. Now, of course, the Egyptologists call that the soul bird. The Seelenvogel is the German term for it, but the point is, it's a bird. Angels are messengers, of course. The whole idea is to bring down the will of heaven. Yeah. So, this is by Louis Klebs. It's in the Zeitschrift für Ägyptische Sprache for 1925.